I stood at the sink, scrubbing the stubborn grease off the frying pan, when Emily stepped into the kitchen. She looked like she was headed straight to a high-end event, dressed in a sleek black outfit and heels that echoed sharply on the tile floor, giving her the air of someone stepping out of a fashion shoot. I glanced up, assuming she might mention dinner or make another comment about the mess I'd made. But she said nothing at first, just leaned against the counter and used the microwave's reflection to adjust her lipstick. Then, with the same tone one might use to mention the weather, she casually said, "I'm going out after work tomorrow and won't be back until the next day." My hand stopped mid-motion, sponge frozen against the pan. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "What do you mean? A work trip?" I asked, even though I already knew her role as an accountant didn't require overnight travel. Numbers and spreadsheets didn't demand that kind of commitment. "No, just going out," she replied, tossing the lipstick into her purse without meeting my eyes. What struck me wasn't just the statement itself, but how she said it. So matter-of-fact, like it didn't deserve further explanation. Like I had no right to ask. I stared at her, expecting something else. A reason. A laugh. Maybe. Some sign this was all just a joke. But she simply grabbed her car keys and slipped them into the same gym bag she always carried. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. I tried again, keeping my tone steady despite the storm rising inside me. "Going where?" "Out. With friends," she replied, finally glancing at me. "I told you." That was all she gave me before spinning on her heel and walking out the door like nothing unusual had happened. Maybe some husbands wouldn't have thought twice. Maybe they'd let it go, put their faith in the woman they married. But that wasn't me, and Emily had been acting off for a while now. There was something evasive in her behavior, always glued to her phone, locking the screen the moment I entered the room, sending texts late into the night. Her gym visits were becoming more frequent but never ended with the usual signs of a workout. She'd return looking more polished than exhausted. As soon as the door shut behind her, a burning sensation spread across my chest. I never considered myself the jealous type, at least not until recently. But this situation, this pattern, had pushed me to the edge. It felt deliberate, like she was testing me, daring me to react. I pulled out my phone and opened our message thread, scrolling through her recent texts. Nothing stood out immediately, just brief, dry responses. The kind of messages that felt more automated than personal. But then something triggered a memory. Last Friday, she'd claimed she had to stay late at work and later messaged me saying she was heading to the gym afterward, so I shouldn't wait up. But now that I thought about it, she hadn't come home looking like she'd exercised. No gym bag. No sweat. None of it lined up. A deep gut instinct hit me hard, the one that tells you the truth even when the facts are still out of reach. I didn't have evidence yet, but the pieces were starting to come together. I needed clarity, and fast. So I followed a hunch. A foolish one, maybe, but at that point, I was running on desperation. I walked over to the closet and pulled out her gym bag, the same one she always carried out the door. Slowly, I unzipped it. There were no workout clothes inside. No athletic shoes. No water bottle. Instead, I found a neatly folded blouse, a stylish pair of heels, and a box of breath mints. That was the moment it all became clear. She wasn't hitting the gym. She was meeting someone, and whoever she planned to see the next evening, it definitely wasn't a group of friends. My heart started pounding so hard I had to sit down. My mind was spiraling, racing through every red flag I'd ignored, every moment she'd quietly disappeared. I wanted to lash out, to call her on the spot and unload all my suspicions and anger. But I held back. I knew I needed more than suspicion. I needed certainty, undeniable proof. That's when it struck me like lightning, sharp and undeniable. If she was lying, and I was convinced she was, I had to catch her in the act. Her vague excuses and emotionless responses weren't enough anymore. No more second-guessing myself. I wasn't being irrational. I wasn't making this up. Something was happening behind my back, and by tomorrow, I planned to uncover the full truth. I carefully placed everything back in her bag, ensuring nothing appeared disturbed, and returned it to the closet exactly as I'd found it. My pulse throbbed in my temples like a slow, steady drumbeat, anger and anxiety rising in tandem. That night, I barely slept. My mind was on a loop, replaying her lies, dissecting every moment from the past few weeks. I couldn't help but wonder, had this started recently, or had it been happening much longer than I realized? Every excuse, every supposed gym session, every late night suddenly seemed suspicious. The following morning, I was up before Emily even stirred. She was still curled beneath the covers, sleeping soundly as if she didn't have a single worry in the world. I found myself staring at her, trying to wrap my head around how effortlessly she could fabricate lies. Her face was a blank slate, no remorse, no flicker of guilt, no trace of the betrayal I knew was simmering just beneath the surface. She appeared almost angelic, too flawless to suspect. I went through my usual morning routine, fixing myself some breakfast and pretending everything was perfectly fine. We exchanged only a few words, a generic greeting and a casual goodbye. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before heading out the door to work. It followed the usual pattern, nothing out of the ordinary on the surface. But deep down, something was off. That kiss, it lacked warmth, felt robotic. There was no sincerity in it. It reminded me of someone acting in a low-budget play, trying too hard to stick to the lines. The moment she left, I kicked my plan into gear. I knew her routine, work first, and then her mysterious detour. She'd already mentioned she wouldn't be home that night, claiming she'd return the following morning. That gave me all the time I needed to dig into the truth. I made some calls, one of them to a tech-savvy friend who specialized in tracking software. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I felt cornered. He quickly hooked me up with a simple app that could follow her phone's location discreetly. Just one quick installation, and I could trace her movements in real time. Everything was lining up. When she came home briefly after work to grab her things, I acted nonchalant. I casually asked what time she expected to be back the next day, putting on an air of indifference. Without missing a beat, she mentioned staying over at a friend's place after their evening out and returning late in the morning. Every sentence she spoke now felt soaked in deception. Even when she tossed a "love you" over her shoulder as she left, it rang hollow, like she was reciting a line in a game where only she knew the rules. The second the door shut, I unlocked my phone and launched the tracker. Her location started drifting, not toward any gym or familiar restaurant, not even remotely close. It was heading directly toward a hotel. A hotel. That single word hit like a blow to the chest. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stared at the screen, disbelief giving way to boiling rage. She wasn't even trying to cover her tracks anymore. The audacity of it all, she thought I'd never catch on. She believed I was clueless, oblivious to the truth unfolding before me. But she misjudged me. That's the problem with people like her. They assume you're blind, that you'll sit quietly while they manipulate everything behind your back. Not this time. I grabbed my keys, pulled on a jacket, and headed out. If she planned to meet someone at a hotel, I was going to be there when it happened. It wasn't just about catching her red-handed. It was about witnessing the look on her face when she realized the curtain had finally dropped. I drove without thinking, my hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned pale. My mind raced, not with anger anymore, but with a chilling resolve. That moment where your emotions burn away and leave nothing but determination. I wasn't just chasing her anymore. I was pursuing the truth that would crack everything open. The app pinpointed her dot, unmoving now, parked outside a place called the Regent. It was a high-end, boutique-style hotel nestled downtown, the sort of venue you'd choose if you were trying to impress someone. Definitely not where you'd casually crash after a girl's night out. My stomach twisted as I parked across the street, eyes fixed on the entrance. The revolving door spun lazily as business people moved in and out. I checked the app again. Her location hadn't budged. That was all I needed to see. There was no longer any room for doubt. She wasn't there on a work call, and she clearly wasn't with her girlfriends. I sat and waited. Seconds dragged into minutes, each one pulsing in my ears like a countdown. And then, there she was. Emily stepped out of a cab, heels clicking against the sidewalk. She looked absolutely stunning, her hair styled to perfection, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, elegant and clearly expensive. But what struck me most was her demeanor. She walked with a boldness, a confidence that told me she knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care who might see. Then, from the hotel entrance, a man appeared. He was tall, dressed in a sharp designer suit that practically screamed wealth. He smiled like someone who had the world in his pocket and placed a hand on the small of her back as they entered the building together. That moment froze me in place. My whole body went rigid, heat flaring through my chest like fire. There it was, undeniable evidence. For a few seconds, it felt like I couldn't breathe. My vision tunneled, zooming in only on the two of them. Her expression, that smile she flashed, once reserved just for me, was now directed at a stranger. The sound of blood rushed in my ears, but I held myself together. I couldn't just charge in there and cause a scene, no matter how much I wanted to confront them. I needed to keep my composure. I had to be smarter than that. I stood there, watching as they slipped through the revolving doors and vanished into the hotel's lobby. The urge to charge in after them was nearly unbearable, but I forced myself to stay put. I needed to think this through. Storming in without a plan wouldn't help anything. So, I did the next best thing. I called the hotel. It sounds absurd now, but at the time, I was desperate and grasping for answers. Hi, I'm trying to reach my wife. She's staying at your hotel tonight, I said, doing my best to keep my tone calm and casual. Of course, sir. May I have her name? The receptionist asked, her voice as professional and composed as ever. I gave her Emily's full name, though my chest felt tight, like my heart was lodged in my throat. One moment. There was a brief silence before she returned. Yes, Mrs. Taylor is checked in. Would you like me to transfer you to her room? Her room. That phrase echoed in my head. She hadn't mentioned staying with coworkers or friends. This wasn't a group trip or work-related booking. It was her own room. I thanked the receptionist with trembling hands and ended the call. I couldn't wait around any longer. I had to see the truth for myself. Stepping out of my car, I crossed the street and entered the hotel with determined steps. The lobby was peaceful, filled with the soft hum of jazz floating through the air, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heartbeat. My stomach churned, twisted into a knot, as I walked deeper into the space, each step dragging me toward a moment I wasn't sure I was prepared to confront. At the front desk, I did my best to appear composed. Hi, I'm here to meet my wife, Emily. She just checked in a few minutes ago. Can you tell me which room she's in? I asked, forcing a tight smile. The desk clerk, a young man with neatly slicked back hair, glanced up at me, then tapped away at his keyboard. Yes, she did just arrive. Room 504. Would you like me to call up for you? I quickly shook my head. No, that won't be necessary. I'd like to surprise her. Surprise her. That was one way to describe what I was about to do. I turned toward the elevators, each step growing heavier. When the door slid open, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the 5th floor. As the elevator rose, the hum of the motor seemed to strip away each layer of my life. The ding announced my arrival at the 5th floor, but the silence that greeted me felt more like a warning than a welcome. The hallway was hushed, the kind of quiet that feels suffocating when you know something inside you is about to break. I walked toward room 504, the numbers glinting softly in the dim light, looking more like a sentence than a room number. My hand hovered near the handle, but I didn't grab it. I didn't knock right away either. I simply stood there, paralyzed, every instinct urging me to turn and leave. But I stayed. I had come too far. Taking a deep breath, I raised my fist and knocked. Seconds passed. Long, agonizing seconds. Then footsteps, quiet, muffled, approached the door. A soft click, and it opened. And there she was. Emily. Seeing her standing there didn't feel real, as if I had stepped into an alternate reality where everything looked familiar but nothing made sense. For a brief second, her eyes went wide, betraying the panic she tried to hide. Then, just as quickly, she masked it with annoyance. What are you doing here? She snapped, her voice low and tense, clearly trying not to be overheard. I couldn't respond immediately. My focus had shifted past her. I was trying to make sense of the room behind her. A warm lamp cast a soft glow over the bed, and there he was. The man in the suit. Jacket off, tie loosened, lounging on the bed's edge like this was his space, like he belonged there. He glanced at me with an air of indifference, like I was nothing more than an interruption to his evening. And who's this? He asked, cocking an eyebrow as though he had every right to be curious. Emily stepped forward, cutting off my view of him, her fingers tightening around the doorframe. I asked you a question, she said more firmly this time. Why are you here? It stunned me. No guilt, no panic, just irritation. As though I was the one intruding. As if I had crossed some invisible line. I think the better question, I replied, my voice thick with a fury I was barely managing to hold back, is what exactly you're doing here. And who is this guy, Emily? She folded her arms across her chest and shot me a hard stare, not even glancing back at him. This isn't what it looks like, she said, reaching for that tired, overused phrase. I felt my blood boil. Not what it looks like. You booked a hotel room, and this guy is here, clearly not just passing through. And you expect me to believe there's some innocent explanation? Don't treat me like I'm an idiot. Emily rolled her eyes in frustration. Derek, calm down. This isn't some kind of soap opera. That did it. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, sharp and joyless, like it hurt just to let it out. Calm down? Are you serious right now? You told me you were going out with friends. Instead, you're here, in a hotel room with him, I said, gesturing toward the man who hadn't even moved. So how about you explain what's really going on here? She exhaled sharply, the sound laced with irritation, as if she were addressing a toddler who just wouldn't listen. All right, she said. You want honesty? Here it is. I've been involved with someone else. My entire body stiffened. Hearing those words, spoken so nonchalantly, landed like a blow to the stomach. My knees nearly buckled, but I somehow managed to stay on my feet. Deep down, I had already suspected something was wrong. The signs had been there for weeks. Still, hearing her confess it with such ease, without the faintest trace of guilt or sorrow, felt like the ground had vanished beneath me. You've been seeing someone else? I repeated slowly. My voice had softened now, no longer driven by fury, but by something heavier, a sinking coldness spreading inside me. She gave a half-hearted shrug. Yeah, this wasn't how I planned to tell you, but since you went all detective and showed up here, well, now you know. I stood in stunned silence, unable to process the sheer calmness in her voice. She acted like we were casually chatting over dinner plans. There was no remorse, no hesitation. Just the truth, dropped like a boulder, crashing through everything I thought we had. In him. I motioned toward the man sitting on the bed, who watched everything unfold with a faint smirk, almost like he was enjoying the show. She glanced back at him briefly. Her features softened slightly, a silent cue meant to reassure him that she had it under control. Then, turning to me again, her face hardened. This is Lucas. We've been seeing each other for a while. Lucas. Of course, he had a name like that, polished, effortless, the kind of guy who clearly hadn't lost a minute of sleep over this chaos. He fit the part too, sleek, well-dressed, and clearly comfortable amid the emotional wreckage he helped create. For a while. I echoed, the words dry and difficult to say. How long? A few months, she said, as casually as if she were listing what she ate for lunch. My mind reeled. Everything blurred. A few months? She had been sneaking around behind my back for that long, living a double life while I was completely in the dark. And now, she was standing there, acting like I was the one being unreasonable. I turned to Lucas, who hadn't moved a muscle. His arms rested loosely on his knees, and he looked at me with mild amusement, as if he were watching a sad movie play out in real time. Part of me wanted to wipe that smug look off his face, but I held back. I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of watching me lose control. So that's it. My voice shook. After 7 years, you're just done? You're throwing everything away for this? Emily didn't even blink. Her expression was blank, maybe even a little bored. Derek, don't turn this into some big tragedy. Things haven't been good for us in a long time. You know that. Her words cut deep. She spoke like this was a slow, mutual unraveling, not something she had detonated behind my back. As if we'd both silently agreed to let everything fall apart. So your answer to that was to cheat? I asked, disbelief turning to fury. To sneak around with someone else instead of facing me? She let out another sigh, her tone even more dismissive this time. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, all right? But it did. And now we're here. There's no use in dragging it out. No remorse. No regret. Not even a flicker of second thoughts. She had already moved on. Her mind was made up long before I ever realized anything was wrong. I could feel something inside me crack, something that had quietly held me together through the uncertainty. And now it was just gone. I looked again at Lucas, then back to her. Are you in love with him? For the first time, she paused, but only for a heartbeat. I don't know, she said softly. Maybe. But that's not really what matters anymore, is it? I stood in silence, letting her words take hold. It was painfully clear now, whatever we had, whatever I thought we were building together, was already lost. Standing there in that quiet hotel room, I saw the truth. Her choice had been made long before I arrived. She tilted her head and gave me a tiny, almost mocking smile. So, are we done here, Derek? Her question lingered in the air, cutting deeper than anything else. The tone, that smirk, it was like this whole moment was nothing but an inconvenience to her. I could feel my entire body tense, no longer trembling from heartbreak, but from sheer, burning rage. Every muscle clenched, my chest rising and falling rapidly as I tried to keep it all inside. I looked at her, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. This wasn't the Emily I had married. This wasn't the person I had built a life with over the years. This woman standing in front of me felt like a stranger, someone cold, detached, and entirely unfamiliar. But she wasn't finished. Her voice sharpened, turning more venomous. What did you expect? She asked. That I'd just sit at home, waiting endlessly for you to finally see me again? You were always too wrapped up in your work, your own world. You stopped noticing me a long time ago. You think I didn't see you? I shouted, my voice cracking with disbelief. Everything I did, the late nights, the sacrifices, it was all for us. For you. And this is how you repay me. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms tightly, like she was dealing with someone who just didn't get it. Oh, come on. Don't pretend like you're some kind of martyr now, she snapped, her voice firm and unwavering. This has never been about your career, Derek. It's always been about you being emotionally absent. You were physically present, sure, but it felt like I was invisible to you. I got tired of feeling that way. My response came sharp and louder than intended, every word landing like a jab. So your brilliant solution was to run into someone else's arms? Rather than confronting me or even trying to salvage what we had, you just, what? Started something with him. I gestured toward Lucas, who hadn't budged an inch. He stood there like some smug spectator, taking in the whole messy scene like it was a reality show he couldn't get enough of. Emily didn't even blink. I wasn't sneaking around, Derek. I moved on. You were never going to change. Lucas? He actually sees me. He cares about me. I scoffed, finally locking eyes with Lucas for the first time. Cares about you? Sure, I bet he does. He must be deeply concerned for your happiness, I said, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Lucas finally entered the conversation, reclining casually on the edge of the bed, his hands behind his head like he was sunbathing. Look, man, I get that this hurts. But whatever's between me and Emily didn't just happen overnight. It's been building for a while. This wasn't some random thing. The arrogance in his tone made my blood boil. He was acting like we were equals in this situation, like I should just accept it and walk away quietly. You really think you're doing her a favor? I asked, my voice low but tight with fury. You destroy a marriage, my marriage, just so you can swoop in and play the part of the good guy? Lucas shrugged, a lazy grin still stuck on his face. Maybe it's not about you at all. Maybe you just weren't giving her what she needed. I took a step toward him, hands balled into fists, but Emily quickly placed herself in front of me, stopping me in my tracks. Her voice cut through the air sharply. Don't even think about it, Derek. You don't get to play the victim here. I froze, my eyes narrowing at her, heart pounding with a mix of anger and grief. Victim? That's not what this is. I stayed faithful. I trusted you for 7 whole years. And for months, you've been with him behind my back, and now you're trying to paint me as the issue. She shook her head slowly, her expression filled with something that looked almost like pity. You still don't understand, do you? This wasn't only about betrayal. It was about how you were never enough. I needed more, and you never gave it. Her words hit with the force of a wrecking ball, tearing through any last hope I might have held on to. There wasn't a hint of guilt in her voice, no regret, not even the faintest sign of wishing things could be repaired. In her mind, the story had already been rewritten. She was the one who had suffered, the one who had been wronged. It was clear she had convinced herself of this new reality, and now she was using it to justify everything. I looked at her closely, for what felt like the first time in forever, and finally saw it. The woman I had fallen in love with, the one I had trusted with my whole heart, was no longer there. She had been gone for a long time. I just hadn't seen it. Silence stretched between us, deep and painful, like a canyon too wide to ever cross. My chest tightened, rage giving way to something much heavier, a hollow, aching sadness. I could feel the sting of tears press against my eyes, but I swallowed them back. I wouldn't fall apart in front of her. I refused to give her that satisfaction. When I finally spoke, my voice came out low, barely audible. You could have come to me, Emily. You could have said you were unhappy. We could have tried. We could have fought for this. But instead, you shattered it all. She didn't say anything in return. She just stood there, her gaze cold and unreadable, like there was nothing left to be said. I forced myself to breathe through the tightness in my throat. So what now? You and Lucas ride off into the sunset? Is that the plan? She met my eyes with a condescending stare. I don't owe you any explanations, Derek. I'm moving forward. You should too. Something within me broke, something I didn't even know was holding on. I took one last look at her, the woman who had once meant everything to me, and finally understood that there was nothing left worth fighting for. She had chosen her path, and now I was choosing mine. Without a single word more, I turned and walked out of that room, fists clenched so tight my nails were digging into my palms. The moment I stepped into the hallway, a surge of emotions hit me like a wave, fury, sorrow, disbelief, all tangled together. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath, to calm the storm inside me, but it was no use. Everything was unraveling. That's when it became crystal clear. I was finished. Finished with her. With the lies. With the illusion that this could ever be repaired. I wasn't the one who tore us apart. That was on her. The elevator ride down felt like it lasted a lifetime. My thoughts were a tangled mess, no clear path, just noise and confusion. My hands trembled, my heart thudded against my ribs, and still, there was nothing left to say. No more words. No final plea. I had seen enough. As the elevator doors parted to reveal the lobby, I made myself step forward like I hadn't just witnessed the collapse of everything I once believed in. I had to escape. The pristine chandeliers and gleaming floors of that accursed hotel felt suffocating, drenched in the scent of betrayal that lingered like an overpowering fragrance bought at a discount store. Stepping outside, I was hit by the buzz of the city settling into evening, laughter echoing from sidewalk cafes, the blare of car horns, and neon lights blinking to life. It was jarring how the world didn't pause, how everything carried on as if my life hadn't just been ripped apart in a single, devastating instant. I didn't make it far. Before reaching my car, my knees buckled and I dropped onto the nearest bench. The adrenaline that had kept me going finally drained away, leaving me hollow. I stared at the traffic flowing past, but my eyes didn't register any of it. All I could feel was that creeping numbness, an emptiness that takes over when the gravity of your loss finally sinks in. Emily wasn't just gone, she had become unrecognizable. The woman I loved had turned into someone else entirely, someone capable of shattering my heart and handing it off to another man like it meant nothing. That realization cut the deepest. I should have seen it coming. The warning signs had been there all along, the subtle shifts, the things I chose to overlook. How had I missed it? I replayed every memory, searching for that one moment when she had stopped loving me. Was it months back? Years? Or had I been deluding myself all along, believing in a connection that never truly existed? Almost without thinking, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our old texts. I searched for something, some hidden clue buried in the I love you, and everyday exchanges. But the deeper I went, the more detached it all felt, like I was flipping through someone else's life. Those messages didn't feel like ours anymore. My finger hovered over her name, the impulse to call her still there beneath the ache and the rage. I wanted to confront her, to make her admit what she had done, to explain why she threw everything away. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. She'd made it clear, with her lies, with the ease of her betrayal, that she had already moved on. That truth landed hard. She wasn't coming back. And more importantly, I didn't want the version of Emily who could cheat for months and still look me in the eyes without remorse. I didn't want the woman who let me believe I was the problem while she was tearing us apart. I sat with my phone for what felt like forever before I finally did what I had to. I blocked her number, deleted every photo, wiped every trace of her from my device. It didn't fix anything, but it was something. A first step. I leaned back against the bench as the cold night air brushed against my skin. For the first time since everything collapsed, I truly felt the weight of it all. The life we were building, the plans we made, it had all crumbled into dust. I didn't even know how long I sat there, motionless, lost in thought. I wasn't ready to return home. The house we shared, filled with memories and echoes of our time together, suddenly felt like a place I couldn't bear to face. Every room would remind me of her, of the deceit, of the nights I waited up believing her excuses. It was too much. But where could I go? I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to explain what had just unfolded. I could already hear their words, telling me to let go, that she didn't deserve me, that I'd be stronger without her. But none of that would make the pain vanish. It wouldn't undo the feeling that my world had been torn apart. With my eyes shut tight, I leaned forward, resting my head in my hands. Tears threatened to spill, but I resisted. I didn't want to fall apart here, on a city bench, becoming a scene from a drama I never signed up for. Yet, the emotional weight was crushing. The betrayal, the heartbreak, it consumed me. I thought about everything we shared, the nights we laughed at terrible movies, the simple comfort of sitting together in silence, the dreams we once mapped out side by side. Now, every bit of it felt like fiction, like a carefully crafted illusion. I'd always heard people say that betrayal felt like being stabbed in the gut, that it turned your life inside out. But nothing could have prepared me for how deeply it would hollow me out. This wasn't just about losing Emily, it was about losing a piece of myself. The version of me that existed with her, the identity we'd built together, was gone. And now, I didn't even know who I was without her. So I remained there, frozen in place, as the city continued on. People walked past, unaware of the turmoil churning inside me. And that was when I understood something. There was still a decision left to make. I had a choice, either remain seated, drowning in sorrow and letting it consume me, or find the strength to rise, leave behind the torment, and begin anew. I knew it wouldn't be simple. In fact, it might turn out to be the toughest decision I'd ever face. But staying trapped in that shadowy, shattered reality was no longer an option. Emily was no longer part of my life. The life I believed we shared had disappeared with her. Still, I was here. I hadn't disappeared. Not yet. With effort, I pushed myself up. My legs trembled, my heart weighed down by sorrow, but I managed to take a step. In that moment, I understood something clearly. I was choosing to move forward, leaving behind everything. Her, the lies, the deception, and the pain she left in her wake. I wasn't going to turn back. The following morning carried a strange, detached feeling. As I opened my eyes in an empty bed, the void beside me seemed louder than any alarm clock. Sleep had barely touched me, but the sunlight leaking in through the curtains reminded me that time was still moving, with or without me. I lay motionless, eyes fixed on the ceiling, numb and uncertain of what steps to take next. I had made a firm decision the night before to walk away, but now, as the calm settled in, the sharp edges of reality returned to cut deep. Emily was no longer in my life. Our marriage had ended. Although I was no longer bound by her betrayal, that freedom felt more like a burden than a release, wrapping tightly around my chest. I forced myself to get out of bed, limbs sluggish, and slowly made my way down the stairs. The kitchen was a chaotic mess. Unwashed plates from a dinner I never bothered to clean up, unopened mail littered the counter, and the refrigerator door was still ajar from a midnight drink I had grabbed while drowning in thought. The room looked like time had stopped, everything frozen in place, everything but me. I brewed a pot of coffee, not because I craved it, but because it gave me something routine to do, some sense of normalcy. Yet even that felt unfamiliar now. My thoughts circled back to her over and over. I wondered what she was doing. Was she still at the hotel? Had she woken up next to him? Did she feel even a trace of guilt? Or had she already moved on, acting like none of this mattered? Almost without thinking, I reached for my phone, still wired to check for a message from her. But there was nothing. No apology. No call. She had already made it painfully clear just how little I mattered to her. She had moved on, probably without a backward glance. Meanwhile, I was stuck here, in what used to be our kitchen, now only mine, trying to figure out what remained. Anger began to simmer inside me again. It came like a crashing wave, reminding me this wasn't just grief. This wasn't just about something ending. It was a deep betrayal, one that cut sharper than anything I had ever experienced. How could she do this to me? How could she act like I had been the one who didn't measure up? The rage surged uncontrollably. Before I knew what I was doing, I hurled my coffee mug at the wall. It exploded into fragments, coffee splashing across the paint. But even that violent release didn't feel like enough. I wanted to destroy more, every trace of her that lingered in this home. The photos from our wedding, the souvenirs from trips we once cherished, the little trinkets that once held memories. I wanted it all gone, scattered on the street, burned away with the past. But I stopped myself. I stood frozen, breathing heavily, hands shaking. Breaking things wouldn't mend what had already been shattered. And just then, as I stood surrounded by broken ceramic and regret, my phone buzzed in my pocket. My heart jolted, clinging to a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, it was her. Maybe she had realized what she had done. Maybe she was ready to talk. But when I looked at the screen, it wasn't her. It was her mother. I stared at the name for a few seconds, uncertain whether I should answer. Sandra had always been kind to me. We weren't especially close, but she had always treated me like part of the family, checking on me during holidays, sending me cards for birthdays Emily usually forgot. I didn't know if Sandra was already aware of what had happened, or what version of the story Emily might have told her. Still, I answered the call. "Hey, Sandra," I said quietly, my voice still hoarse and heavy from everything I'd been through. There was a brief pause, like she was searching for the right words. "Derek," she finally said, her tone soft and filled with concern. I don't know everything that's going on, but Emily called me last night. She told me you too, that things are over." Hearing those words from someone outside of my personal storm made it all feel even more real. I rubbed my forehead, the truth settling in again like a weight pressing down. "Yeah," I murmured. "That's one way to describe it." Sandra exhaled a long, weary sigh that seemed full of compassion. She didn't go into detail, but Derek, I've known my daughter her whole life. And if she's hurt you somehow, I am so sorry. I may not know what happened, but I want you to know I'm here, if you ever need someone to talk to. Her response caught me completely off guard. I had braced myself for her to defend Emily, to claim I had misunderstood, that I wasn't seeing things as they really were. I expected some kind of excuse. Instead, her tone carried a quiet regret, as though she knew her daughter was fully capable of the betrayal I had witnessed firsthand. "I appreciate you saying that," I managed to reply, my voice trembling slightly. "It really means a lot. It's just a lot to process right now." "I get it," Sandra said gently. "I'm not going to push you. Just take care of yourself, okay? You don't deserve any of this." Hearing those words, "You don't deserve this," hit harder than I ever anticipated. After all the accusations Emily had thrown at me, all the venom in her words, I had begun to doubt myself. Maybe I hadn't been enough. Maybe I had overlooked something important, failed her in some way. But Sandra's quiet reassurance, hesitant as it was, reminded me that Emily's cruelty wasn't justified, no matter her reasons. I didn't deserve to be treated like that. Once we ended the call, I stood still for a moment, staring at my phone as a wave of fatigue settled deep in my chest. I couldn't keep living like this, replaying that night over and over in my mind, reliving every painful detail like I was stuck in some kind of emotional loop. If I truly wanted to heal, to move on with my life, I had to let go of Emily, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. I needed to stop giving her control over my mind. I moved through the house slowly, opening doors and drawers, uncovering the remnants of her presence. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her books lined the shelves, and little personal items were scattered throughout the rooms, pieces of her left behind when she bolted off with Lucas. I found boxes and bags and began packing everything up. With each item I tucked away, it felt like I was reclaiming my space, piece by piece. By the time I finished, the house felt emptier than it had in weeks, but in a comforting, peaceful way. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like I could breathe again. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt like it belonged to me. I didn't know what the future held. I hadn't decided whether I'd file for divorce immediately or take time to sort through my emotions. But for now, this moment was enough. I sat on the couch, surveying the now bare walls and shelves. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning, a small but powerful step toward healing and rebuilding what had been broken. The following days blurred together in a haze of quiet reflection and deliberate choices. Every little action, from sealing up another box of Emily's belongings to deleting one more memory from my phone, felt like a burden lifted. It wasn't about pretending she never existed. Our years together had been real, both the good and the bad. But I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me or weigh me down any longer. Eventually, I found myself sitting with the divorce papers in front of me. I hadn't rushed the decision. I'd given myself time to consider every possibility, even entertaining that faint, foolish hope. Was there a chance to fix this? Could a conversation change anything? Could I somehow forgive her? But then, that night came back to me in vivid detail. The way she had looked at me, cold, distant, as though I were nothing more than an obstacle she had finally shaken off. Her lies, her indifference, the way she had made our marriage feel disposable. That wasn't something I could forget or forgive. Trust, once shattered like that, couldn't be repaired. So I signed the papers. No grand gestures, no dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet moment, a few scribbles on the page, and it was over. Emily's chapter in my life was officially closed. Painful, yes, but also eye-opening, full of hard-earned lessons I hadn't seen coming. Weeks passed without a word from her. I suspected she thought I'd come crawling back, desperate for reconciliation. But she had misjudged me. She didn't realize I had finally seen through her deceit. I wasn't going to be some lingering figure in the background of her new life with Lucas. That version of me was gone. Then, completely out of nowhere, a message lit up my phone. It was from Emily. Just a short, casual text, as if she hadn't shattered everything we had built. "Hey, hope you're doing okay. Can we talk?" The audacity of it made me laugh, a bitter, humorless sound. Now she wanted to talk? After everything she had done, she thought a conversation could patch it all up? I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into her chaos. I had already spent too long questioning her choices, wondering what I could have done differently. That time was over. The truth is, in those weeks of silence, I discovered more about myself than I had during the entire span of our relationship. It wasn't just about letting go of Emily. It was about letting go of the version of myself that existed in that marriage. Somewhere along the line, I had started to disappear, reshaping myself into the person I thought she wanted me to be. I had gradually let go of everything that once brought me joy. My passions and hobbies, the very things that made me feel alive, were abandoned. I became a mere echo of her wants and preferences, while my own faded quietly into the background. But now, with time and space on my side, I could begin the journey back to myself. I started slowly, dusting off books I hadn't read in ages, taking long aimless walks just to be alone with my thoughts. It wasn't some grand reinvention, but it felt like movement in the right direction. One afternoon, I felt a pull toward a place I hadn't visited in many years, a hiking trail I once cherished, one Emily never enjoyed. The trail wound through the forest, and as the sun began its descent, golden light filtered through the trees, bathing everything in a warm glow. Standing at the summit, overlooking the vast horizon, a wave of calm washed over me. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, the noise in my mind dulled, and I could finally breathe. In that stillness, clarity found me. This wasn't just about letting go of Emily. It was about releasing the version of myself that had clung so tightly to something that was already unraveling. I no longer recognized the man who had once begged for scraps of affection from someone who couldn't see his worth. That chapter of my life had ended. I had closed it. Emily had reached out. Her message still sat unopened on my phone. I didn't need her explanations, her attempt at an apology. I didn't need anything from her to move forward. I had already found what I needed in the quiet moments, in the small efforts to rebuild myself from the ground up, without her. By the time I made my way back down the trail, the sun had disappeared beneath the horizon, and the sky had transformed into a canvas of soft pinks and deep oranges. It was breathtaking. And right then, I felt something unexpected, hope. Not for a dramatic reunion or a final confrontation. No, this hope was for myself, for the new life I was piecing together from the ruins of what once felt like everything. Emily was a part of my past, but now I was stepping into a new beginning. And for the first time in what seemed like forever, I truly believed I would be okay.